Welcome to the inaugural edition of Friday Night Drinks. It's not really the inaugural edition of Friday Night Drinks. We do this every Friday. We get together, have a bit of tipple, talk nonsense, and somewhere along the line we figured that some people might actually want to listen to what we talk about. So we're gonna make this into a podcast, and we'll be sharing this with you guys every Friday. My name is George, and I'll be moderating today. I'm here with my friend Tinashe, who sometimes I will call Mukanya, and my friend Rufaro, who under Rashumba, but we don't actually believe that he's got a totem, so we will generally only call him Rufaro. For our first discussion, before we get into our first discussion, we'll maybe introduce you guys to what we're drinking this evening. Rufaro, what do you have?
Single malt Scotch of the Highlands. It's quite an easygoing whiskey. I would love to pretend that I know much more about it, but to be honest, the truth of the matter is that I was recently introduced to it by somebody who likes to adulterate it with amaretto and lemon. I won't go much further into it, but I think you'll find it quite enjoyable.
As the poor friend, I'm drinking whatever I'm served in Rufaro's office. I could like it. A bit peachy, a bit rough at the back of the throat, but I think one can get used to it. Should we bother? What are you drinking?
Actually, I believe you should. It's something more interesting than whiskey. It's Tanganda tea.
Would you like to say something about this tea?
Well, it comes from the highlands of Zimbabwe and made by a fantastic company, and I thoroughly enjoy it. So do, I believe, 90% of Zimbabweans.
We'll take your word for it. This evening we're going to be talking about an issue that has been topical over the last few days, which is the issue that the country is about to receive some special drawing rights from the IMF. You might have seen it on social media and in some of the mainline press referred to as SDRs. Tinashe, being the sober one among us, would you like to tell us what are these SDRs and why are they so important?
Thank you very much. So special drawing rights, it's a sort of currency from the IMF made up of 5 currencies, international currencies: US dollar, pound sterling, yen, and the Chinese. And so it's backed up by those currencies, but it's essentially an IMF currency and unit of account. That is at the essence of what special drawing right is.
So the IMF prints money?
Technically, yes.
So we get to?
Sorry. Fascinating. Yeah. So fiat currency is, in its essence, a decreed currency. It's currency because we say it's currency. So the IMF and
like
the countries. Something like that, but a little different from bond notes, because I think bond notes was a surrogate currency. It was not an original currency. It was a currency that was trying to mimic and trying to imitate a real currency. So I think that's where the fundamental differences are. But the IMF currency is one that the IMF and its members come up with, and they've decided that they will call it SDR, Special Drawing Rights. And in its very essence, if you look at where the IMF is coming from, it's usually balance of payment support. That's really where the IMF comes in. So countries, when they're going through some sort of reform or restructuring, and their currencies are, for lack of a better word, fragile, then the IMF comes in to support, to ensure that there is no run on the currency. So that's really where the IMF comes in. And once in a while, as members, as IMF members, they decide that for whatever reason, and in particular now because of COVID, that countries do need this support, and they will give equal amounts to all the countries depending on their rights and their equity within the IMF.
Equal amounts? So we get the same
Well,
as
no, not equal amounts, but amount in tandem with the overall shareholding that you have in the IMF.
But okay, so this is a currency. Where do you use it? Can you take SDRs to a shop?
No, you cannot. But what typically happens is you can take the SDR to a company, to another country that is in surplus, in US dollars, for example, or yen, or any other currency, and you can trade your SDRs for that particular currency. So a very good example is, for example, you trade with Zambia, and Zambia happens, this is just an example, Zambia happens
No,
to be...
Zambia's
Zambians don't get too excited. But suppose that Zambians were in surplus, and surplus of US dollars, and Zimbabwe was in deficit, and they had an SDR, then they would go to Zambia and present their SDR to Zambia, and Zambia would give them the US dollars in exchange for the SDRs. So what it does in terms of Zambian reserves is there's no change. It's still, SDR is seen and deemed a currency, a reserve currency. So there's no change to Zambians' reserves. But what it does is that Zimbabwe now has actual US dollars that they can use in the market.
Okay.
So it does have an exchange rate, by the way.
Oh, so how's this? Okay, what's the exchange rate? How's
So
it determined?
the exchange rate, how much was it determined? It was determined just after the World War II. So I won't get into the nitty-gritties, but it's an exchange rate of $1 to, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 1.4438 US dollars. So one SDR is equivalent to 1.4438 SDRs.
As determined by a bunch of people in 1945. A bit like, anyway. Okay, so it's got an exchange rate. We can go and find another country that wants these SDRs. Goodness knows what they do with them, but they'll give us some money in return for them.
US dollars, typically, because the international currency of trade is US dollars. So typically what happens is a lot of the countries that have SDRs present these to the US because the US can print its own US dollars. And when you present the SDRs, you then get US dollars. And then you use the US dollars in your foreign currency market and to protect your own local currency.
Okay, in our case, the US doesn't like us. So what are we going to do with our SDRs? Do you think Mr. Biden will think, hey, ED, old friend?
George, that's a very good question. And we can speculate. Well, we don't really need to speculate, but we know that because of the relations between Zimbabwe and America, that won't happen. We won't go to the Americans. But there are more than 200 other countries that are possible partners that we could trade with, our SDRs with.
Myanmar, North Korea.
I think Myanmar will likely be in deficit. Russia will be in deficit, but I think China is a very good partner that we could, because we already owed them some money. So, and here I'm just speculating that they're more likely to look at it very, very amenably. And there have been arguments, for example, the Gulf countries were always in surplus, US dollar surplus, and there might be friendly Gulf or countries that might quite happily exchange our SDRs for real US dollars.
But how many are we getting?
Okay, so right now it's just speculation. We will know exact amount in June, but the speculation is that we'll get about 900 million worth of SDRs, which is approximately 1.3 billion US dollars.
So not enough to pay for the bike road.
Sadly not.
Okay, we'll come
I
back.
don't think that helps.
Yeah, I think it sheds some light. Viewers, at the end of the show, our social media handles will show up, our email address will show up. If you've got questions, if you've got comments, please feel free to put them through. And I think next week we can always answer some of the questions and clarify things that viewers may want to know more about you. When was the last time we did, how often does this happen? Do we get it every year? Is it like the currency that it just happens when a certain group of people decides that they're going to do something?
Now, as I explained earlier, I think this one has been brought about because of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, which has now gone on for more than a year now. And a lot of businesses were closed, a lot of countries were effectively closed. So they see this as somewhat able to support the very fragile state that would have really suffered because of COVID. It has happened before for Zimbabwe, if people remember in 2009 when, again, after the global financial crisis, the IMF saw it fit to come into the market and offer SDRs as support for a lot of the countries, their member countries.
So let's get this right. Whenever the global economy is not doing well, a certain bunch of people gets together and decides to print money. And that's okay. But it's not okay when our economy is not doing well for us to print money.
Well, I think Rufaro would have something to say to this. I totally buy into that notion that countries should not be able to print willy-nilly. But Rufaro, I know, has different views, and not to paraphrase, but
the man is here.
Yeah,
and that whiskey's going down quite fast.
so it might be interesting to hear what the
Maybe we
audience
should
thinks.
capture it before it's too late.
Look, I tend to differ with students of the Austrian School of Economics like Tinashe that think that printing is always bad. I think that when you're in a tough situation and you only have bad choices, sometimes printing is the least bad choice. So if you look at the global financial crisis that he referenced, a lot of economists believe that if it wasn't for significant stimulus printing, the global economy would have gone into deep recession, if not another depression, which would have been worse than whatever adversity printing causes. But we didn't run that experiment, so we can't say that definitively. But it's a raging debate, and Tinashe is on the Austrian side, and I'm not.
So why does everybody get upset when Uncle JPM pulls the same stunt?
Well, look, I think it's a question of the different history of printing in the US and in Zimbabwe. So we had hyperinflation slightly more than a decade ago that ended in 2009 when we dollarized. So it's something that's very fresh in the public's imagination here. Whereas the US has never really had hyperinflation. They're the world's global reserve currency, and they've done a bunch of printing in recent history that they've gotten away with. Because I also think that they have been a bit more thoughtful about it than we were, between 1998 and 2008, what people refer to as Zimbabwe's lost decade. So they didn't get into as much trouble. It wasn't as dramatic and crazy as it was between 1998 and 2008 here. So I think the Americans, yes, you will have some very shrill voices, warning that the US is about to enter hyperinflation and the greenback is about to lose its status as the world's reserve currency. But I think they manage their printing better, than other countries that have suffered hyperinflation.
Okay. If you're sitting there and this sounds to you like one set of rules for the global economy and the rich countries and a different set of rules for countries like Zim, I sympathize. But for some reason, this seems to be the global economic consensus.
Maybe I can come in there. I'm not to support Rufaro. I vehemently disagree with everything that Rufaro has said, but I think that's for another day.
It's because you're drinking tea.
That too. But I think to put it in context, the nature of printing when you look at Zimbabwe and when you look at America and when you look at IMF, the first thing that we must ask ourselves is what's backing a currency. So we know it's fiat, and fiat is a Greek word for, a Latin word for Greek. But what's backing it is, for example, the US production. So if you look at the US economy, it actually does produce, and it produces quite a bit. And that is why the rest of the world is quite happy to hold US dollars, because they're betting on American innovation and American enterprise. I'm not so sure that the international community would buy into a Zimbabwean dollar for the same reasons. That's one. The other reason that's used a lot of times, it's who can exert the greatest amount of pain in the international community, and the US has that force. So it sort of forces everybody to use the US dollar. I think oil, we all use the US dollar to trade. So I think the power and the superpower nature of America ensures that we all accept the US dollar.
You just switched from IMF to
Yes, it's still printing. So let's get it right. It's all printing. But when you look at the IMF, you have the member countries backing it. And IMF does not print as often as all the other currencies. So if you look at the US, actually, right now, the US, the amount of printing that they've done, it's still 35%. The increase in money supply in the US is 35% of GDP. And that's actually the lowest when you look at what's happening in the UK and Europe.
What was ours last year?
Ours last year was 5. The latest we have as of January is over 500%.
Okay,
So that in itself, and if you really believe that a good is determined by supply and demand, well, the demand for the US would be a whole lot more because they're just not printing as much as the rest of the countries are. And the IMF even less so. So the last time the IMF actually printed was 10 years ago.
Interesting. But okay, coming back home. So we get this $900 million thereabouts of money, printed or not. What should it be used for?
900 million SDRs, I think.
1.4 billion SDRs.
No.
Is that the way?
It's the other way.
Oh.
900 million SDRs, which will equate to about 1.3 billion US dollars.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I had that wrong. So we get this 1.3 billion. What should we do with it? But maybe before you tell us I'll ask you what we should do with it. But Tinashe, because you clearly read a lot more. What we do before
The virtues of drinking tea.
In the past, when we've received these SDRs, what have we done with them?
So according to IMF rules, you can do whatever you want to do with this money. It's money from heaven. And it's dependent on the country and its leadership and less the people, actually. I don't think the people can decide, but their representatives in courts, and that's the government in power, can decide and has a lot of leeway as long as they get the US dollars. And like I said, there are many countries that are in surplus, so I don't think that would be a problem. But they have lots of leeway in deciding what they will do with it.
But what have we done in the past?
Well, in the past, if you look at what Nheweyembwa did then, and he was the Minister of Finance, the first thing that he did was to actually pay off our loan from the IMF. So that's the first thing that he actually did, was to pay off whatever was outstanding. And his idea then was to show goodwill to the IMF and to the World Bank, to everybody. I think to a large extent it did work.
Did they give us any money?
No, they didn't, but I think that our relations with IMF improved to such an extent that when Tinashe BT left and you Chinamasa, we then had the 2016 Lima.
Did we get some money?
Well, then the coup happened and what we all know.
There was no coup. Okay, so that was 2009. And did we ever get SDRs before 2009?
No, we did get SDRs, but we've had IMF support. So the two incidents that I can recall is 1982, 1983, because we had a drought in that particular year, and the IMF came and supported us. I think it was around 300 million US dollars at that particular time. And then again in 1991. What's interesting, what you will find interesting, and your viewers might find interesting, is that in 1991, when we got the support, we defaulted on, it wasn't an SDR. This was a direct balance of payment support, and we defaulted on the first payment in 1991. But I think SDRs is 2009. And I don't know if we've explained this, but there's something that is very distinct to balance of payment support and SDRs. SDRs, it's a grant. It's a loan.
It's money from him.
Yes, it's a loan that you don't need to pay back.
But it's not a loan, it's a freebie. I mean, if you don't have to pay it back, how is it a loan?
I think
it's like getting tractors from the government.
I think you're quite right. You're quite right, technically. But the IMF will tell us it's a loan. So if you ask them, what are the terms?
You get a tractor from the government.
If you ask them what are the terms, they'll tell you you don't need to pay it back.
Yeah. No, I didn't mean that. I need a tractor from the government. Okay, so this time out, we've got this 1.3 billion coming.
Potentially. It's not yet.
Hypothetically,
It's not cast in stone, but yeah.
So it's a Friday night, we're drinking whiskey. Yom Tuli. The money comes through, you get the paperwork, somebody in your office confirms. It's there. What did you do?
I'll pay off, I'll use all of it to pay off debt to our international creditors, build some goodwill.
What? Okay. I don't expect you to actually know the numbers. What impact did it have if we paid 1.3 billion to our creditors?
So I think he explained it.
But
He explained it well. It's really about
well.
goodwill. He explained it well. That's his argument, not my argument. But I think what he meant is
Show some goodwill.
But
this is what Tinashe did.
Yeah.
And then nothing happened. And then Chinamasa came, and then we blamed the not cool thing for no money coming through. But the last time we did this, we didn't get any money from these guys. And in my other life, I'm a banker, and generally, if somebody comes and pays me some of what they owe me, I say thank you, and I promise to give them another loan. But do I?
No, but look, I think the question is, we are in a deficit in terms of confidence on global capital markets, which is why we can't, raise money internationally to do things here as a state. And it's a long, hard road to actually get to a place where we're able to raise money from global capital markets. And so we have to demonstrate some goodwill. And if you have a windfall of 1.3, okay, let me put it this way. If someone owes you 100 bucks and you hear that they have a windfall for 50 bucks, right? And you bump into them 6 months later and they haven't paid you even 50 cents, how would you feel as a creditor?
Okay, I hear you. But okay, so we're sitting here. We've got $1.3 billion on its way. We need to pay 260 divided by 3, 53 and a third million or something like that, to be part of the Kazungula bridge. But they will actually get a bridge that you can see and touch. Should we not pay for the bridge? Give some money to some people who say they're building a road for bike repair. It's a separate story. and we'll actually see a road, rather than give some money to some distant people that we think we will appease by giving them some money.
Well, it depends. Are you thinking small or are you thinking big, right? Are you thinking about, raising billions of dollars from global capital markets and turbocharging this economy, taking it to the next level, possibly making Zimbabwe $50, $100 billion economy in 10 years? Or are you interested in a bridge that you can see and touch? Where is it?
Good question, but the bridge I can see and touch, the 50, 100 billion is dependent on a bunch of guys that I don't really know, who once in a while get in a room and decide to print money and then allocate it on a formula that they understand and nobody else understands, and you have to sell this fake money back to them at a rate they determine so that you get some real money. I think I'm going with the bridge. I get some money, I'll pay some of my friends, they build a bridge, and they fix the road, and there's a road. Okay. Tinashe, what would you do?
Okay, so I have three options. So I have.
You should stop drinking tea.
I think that if things were normal, what has happened in the last week, your viewers may not be aware of this, but you had the Africa Paris Summit, and
we weren't invited, so it didn't exist.
But I think it's important to read in between the lines, and I think what Macron, when you look at the 650 billion that the IMF is releasing, only $33 billion is actually coming to Africa. But I think Macron and the Western nations or the Paris Club have made it very clear that they're looking at a concomitant of measures beyond just the SDRs. So the first thing is they're looking at the SDRs themselves, but the second thing that they're looking at is debt forgiveness and debt write-offs of a lot of the African countries' debt. And the third thing is they're looking at potential bailouts. So this is something that the Western nations are looking at. And it's you keep talking about this idea of printing money and how the world is crazy at this particular moment and just printing money. But it's a huge opportunity for Zimbabweans, because it means that the international world...
Sorry, okay, I'm halfway through my glass of whiskey. I've lost it. So what's your first point?
Okay, my first point is to go to the Paris Club and say we have $1 billion, the things that you require of us to get again into the family of nations is institutional and political reforms, and we sign off on our debt, which according to the Ministry of Finance own data is now 17 billion. So they've acknowledged the 12 billion, which includes 3.5 billion that we owe the farmers. And then
Do we owe the farmers anything, really?
Yes, I think
Signed the
now,
contract.
now we actually do.
Now we have to sign the contract.
We actually signed the contract.
Uncle Bob actually just never said. He just said it wasn't a thing.
Yeah, we actually do owe them.
Our new owner said we do owe them.
But there is a caveat that a lot of people are not talking about, is that if we do not pay anything within a year, the 3.5 billion turns to $5 billion. That's the penalty. And then from then on...
When is the year up?
A year up should be sometime this year, actually.
But anyway, so
Okay, so let me get this straight. This is very interesting to me. So basically, there's a bunch of people who expect a check from us for 3.5 billion, and they believe if we don't pay in a year, they can get 5.
Well, that's
That sounds crazy to me.
But anyway, stay focused. So your first idea is we go to the
there's a lot of...
okay, what do we do at the Paris Club with this one?
The Georgian Rufaro, I must say, there's a lot of whiskey drinking in this country. And they just have to acknowledge it. But let's get to...
So we got this 1.3 billion. We go to them and say what?
Okay, we say it's the Lima route, but in a much bigger way. Where we go to them and we say, you know what, we are here to atone for our sins. of the past, and we're here to implement the reforms that you guys want. And
so it's Rufaro's idea, except you're just structuring it and saying,
absolutely.
It's the tea drinkers version of my idea. So
Absolutely.
basically paying
So what
off
is
That's why you must drink together tea.
so you just say, okay, so we go. So Rufaro says, okay, go pay some creditors. You say, okay, go clear the arrears with the Paris Club as much as you can.
Not
Which is a fancy way of saying
don't get into the room where you have debt write-offs. So under my calculations, we owe about 20 billion. So potentially, if you look at Nigeria, which in 2006,
17 and 20. Difference is 3. Sounds like a familiar agriculture program, but
but it's a whole program. What will happen is you get a debt write-off, and if you take away 70% of our debt, you're left with about 8 billion. And then the 8 billion is restructured in such a way so that the interest rate is lower. Because that's the other thing. We've got Afreximbank loans that have exorbitant interest rates. Okay? So we're paying upwards of 10% of that. Whereas if we go to the Paris Club, we get a debt write-off, and then second, we get to pay interest rate of 1%. And if you do that, you're looking at your debt to GDP ratio comes drastically down less than 50%.
But doesn't that involve joining HIPIC? Which means that we are admitting to being highly indebted and poor.
I like your memory because that was actually contagious during the GNU times. But if you read through what the Paris meeting is looking at, it's not necessarily that you have to be under HIPIC. It's because of the moment that we live in. And like I said, right now the world is, there's a lot of these liberal policies. And I think that Zimbabwe should take advantage of these liberal policies that are out there.
Okay, so we do this.
So that's my number one.
So we do that as number one. So
but I don't think it will happen because of the nature of the Zimbabwean government. So, but we need to put it out there.
Don't forget the nature of Joe and Boris. They might just not be given.
Well, they've been very emphatic on what Zimbabwe needs to do, political and institutional reforms, and it's the same things that every Zimbabwean wants.
Really?
Absolutely.
We all want Malaba to go, or we all want Malaba to stay. I think ask your audience. I think some of them want him to go, some of them want him to stay.
We want an independent judiciary. How about that?
Would we even agree on an independent judiciary? Okay, anyway, we'll first go to the first question.
But that's my first point. So the second point is an acknowledgement that number one won't happen, but it's.
No, but do you have a view on whether it would be the best? Is that your number one option because you think it's the best option, or it's the first option that came to your mind?
Well, it's the best option. It's actually the best option. But let me run through my options, and then I'll come back to why those three different options offer. First of all, 1.3 billion in the context of Zimbabwe is nothing. It's absolutely nothing. I don't know why we should have any sort of...
Stay on track. Second point.
Yeah, okay. So the second point to me is...
But I will pick up on that.
Okay.
We'll come back to it.
Oh, okay. That's fine. Now, I need to get back my line of thinking. Okay, so the second point is we take the $1 billion, 1.3 billion US dollars, and we go to South Africa and we say to South Africa, we want to start a currency board. And our currency board...
Don't we have one? Wasn't Eddie Cross on something?
Well, I think a lot of people look at the rand.
Sorry.
But let me explain how this one would work. How would it work?
Terrible idea.
Yeah. Okay, so how it would work is we will go to the South African Reserve Bank and we will say we want to start a currency board, and it will be fully backed by the rand because 40% of our imports and our exports are really to South Africa and from South Africa. So that's our largest trading partner. So we're going to deposit. Number two, let me just explain. And then number two, a lot of our remittances, over 50% of our remittances are actually coming from rand. But you have this weird...
Let's keep it simple. It's a Friday night.
Okay.
Let's keep it. So we're going to deposit this money in the South African Reserve Bank.
So we sign a contract with the South African Reserve Bank where we form a monetary board which manages the currency board. Because as Rufaro rightly said,
Simply. Where does the money go? What do we do with the money?
okay, so
So
the
it's
money,
scenario
we launched the money
by
with
people.
South African Reserve Bank, and in turn, every Zimbabwean dollar we issue is 100% backed by
But
the
didn't
bank.
you tell us that about bond notes? Bond coins. The bond coin was a bond coin because the money was somewhere.
No, that's not my argument. That was someone else's argument. But what the difference is, the bond notes were not backed up by anything. They were a surrogate.
This is a bad idea on so many levels.
So a currency board. Maybe let me explain.
How's the currency board chosen?
Okay, so we determined the currency board. So
Who's we?
we as Zimbabweans, right?
So we have an election for these guys.
No, we don't have an election. But why don't you just listen? I see you're quite excited about this idea.
It sounds familiar. The problem is it sounds very, very familiar. We've done this before.
You're quite excited about this, and what you need to do is to just hear the argument and listen closely. So what happens with the currency board is the money, you have a currency board that's fully backed. So every Zimbabwean dollar you issue here is fully backed by a rand at the South African Rand Bank, right? The Reserve Bank of South Africa. And you cannot print more than that.
What stops us?
Because it's South Africa. South Africa, the monetary governance that we form stops us. So you cannot issue, because what it means is that every Zimbabwean dollar that you have in Zimbabwe becomes fully convertible into rands.
Okay, so I'm
I'm going to ask our
from-
producer.
can I start- can I-
I think you need, at this stage, you need to put a one-to-one gauge game. Picture, billboard on the
So
screen.
it's fully backed. So let me fully explain why the benefits. Why?
No, I just let me start and just ask you a simple question.
Okay.
Okay. The idea is that we can't print money that's not backed. So why should we have the power to print at all? And if we don't have the power to print at all, why should we have a local currency at all?
Okay. So there's certain. Remember what I said about part 1 and part 2. That my preferred position is the part 1. The part 2 is an acknowledgement of certain realities in Zim. So, for example, the issue that we've already issued some dollars in this market, and we've got about 200 billion worth of Zim dollars, which, if you use any whatever rate you want to use, that's equivalent to about 1.5 billion US dollars. So there's something that we can already immediately immunize the Zim dollars that are already in the financial services, where they become fully convertible into rands. So that's number 1. Now, immediately what happens,
My stomach is turning.
and immediately
I've
what
heard this
happens, okay, no. Remember now, you can present the Zim dollar to the South African Reserve Bank. And the South African Reserve Bank is the one that will pay you a rand. So imagine right now with your Zim dollars, and you present your Zim
So
dollars.
you want to win us to a soft currency with hectic exchange controls?
So keep this in mind. This is the second option. It's not the first.
Should be your 50th100th, but anyway.
I think you should do
what?
So you hear me out. What you're doing is, right now you have a local soft currency, a very soft currency. Well, maybe soft to put it lightly. It's a very fragile currency. And what you're saying is, the rand, yes, but the rand has actually been strengthening when you look at the US, but it's primarily driven by, it's our largest trading partner. So we're backing the currency in Zim on what's based on our trading partner. So how it works out is, for every Zim dollar that you have, it's backed by the rands that are safe in the South African Reserve Bank, right? So what it does immediately is interest rates, for example, right now, our interest rates are around northwards of 60%. So inflation immediately comes down, but more importantly, interest rates also come down. Our interest rates will now mimic the interest rates in South Africa.
And we lose our sovereignty.
Yeah, there's that word again.
That is pronounced that way.
Yeah, sovereignty. Yeah, I think that is something that we just need to move into the 21st century. I've argued this, that already 5 million Zimbabweans are outside of the teapot borders. So have we lost our sovereignty if half your citizens are going to be outside of your borders? So I think the issue of
you did to get to half, but anyway.
Well, I'm projecting what's going to happen in the next decade if things remain as is. We're going to find a lot of Zimbabweans.
Okay, so we said no. That's option 2. What's option 3?
Yes, 3.
Okay. So option 2 is what I'm hoping will happen. But what's likely to happen is this money is actually not a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. And what's likely to happen, we are heading towards an election, 2023. And so essentially 2022 is going to be an election year. And I think a lot of this money will, because money is fungible. So yes, the IMF will be able to see where the money is going, but where it ends up, we've seen this with Command Agriculture, it will end up in election year, and it will be used to fund an election. So that's what I think is more likely to happen. Of course, there'll be some token monies here and there, but I think essentially it will go into the 2023 election.
The 2030 target cheaper. Your take on where it will actually go?
Look, I don't think I differ with Tinashe about this money being spent on electioneering. I think that might be true in a country that has a real opposition. We don't live in such a country. So I don't necessarily think that there's going to be a lot of spending in that space. I think that actually in terms of what is most likely to happen is what you suggested, we'll spend it on things that we can see and touch, like the bridge, like, you know, the road.
Which means it will go to our friends, which means it will do what he said it will do.
Well, I don't know. I actually think that in the grand scheme of things, it's not optimal. Okay, it's not the best outcome for Zimbabwe, but I don't think it's. I think owning a stake in a regional bridge and having a significantly better roads, I think it's a win. So I think it will be a net positive. I'm not fatalistic and cynical.
So you gotta agree.
Well, let me come in there and just provide some context.
As we noted in the bridge, people need Zambias and t-shirts and stuff. It can be capitalized.
Let me come in there and give context to.
But I think his idea, which I'd rather go back to, of linking us to the rand, is horrible.
Maybe you want to explain why you think it's horrible.
I'm moderating the discussion.
Okay.
We've left that. Okay, so you guys both think the money is most likely going to go into some sort of domestic spending with an eye on the election.
That's a good summary.
And Rufaro thinks it's not a bad outcome. Maybe not the best, but it's a net positive.
Yeah, I think it's a net positive.
You agree? It's a net positive?
Oh, it depends what you mean by net positive. I think
we'll be better off
giving
having done that than having done nothing.
Well, we're better off doing nothing, actually.
Why?
So you think we should get a check for 1.3 billion and do nothing and pretend we didn't get it?
Essentially, that's what you were supposed to do, because it's the central bank, right? It comes in as reserves. It's supposed to be central bank reserves. Right now, central bank reserves are zilch.
Possibly negative.
Possibly negative.
Yeah,
in fact, we've got 5 billion debt. Our BZ is undercapitalized at this particular moment in time. So actually doing nothing is actually a net positive than spending this money in election area.
So but the two are not mutually exclusive.
Okay, you guys are never going to agree. And the whiskey's getting warm. Last question. When we actually look at the numbers, the country actually generates in the region of about $6 billion a year.
In terms of exports.
In terms of exports, diaspora remittances, yes. We're not counting the grey exports and the black exports. We're not counting the undocumented diaspora remittances. So we're possibly getting about 8 billion into the country a year. Why are we so excited about 1.3?
That's a very good question.
we're not. This discussion was Tinashe's idea. I didn't really think this SDR thing was as much of a big deal as he's making it out to be.
I think that the excitement. the enemies, the excitement, if you think about it, is coming from the politicians for obvious reasons. The excitement, if you think about it, I know this is Friday drinks, but Friday drinks that are happening everywhere. If you think about where the excitement is coming from, it's essentially coming from the politicians. The politicians are the most excited about this. I think the average citizen understands that we had the farm mechanism scheme that had gone mechanization and 1.4 billion went with command agriculture and over 3
I
billion.
want a tractor, don't listen to this guy. Please, can I have a tractor?
So I think the common man and woman is not the least bit excited about this. But the people who have created enough excitement around this are the elites, the politicians who are looking at this and know what it means for essentially an election. They know exactly what it means. And it's a shot in the arm for an election. As far as the economy is concerned, I must say it will help, and it will help in terms of just purely consumption, from a consumption perspective. I think COVID has really decimated the demand side of our economy, and this shot in the arm will do quite a bit in terms of just consumption. So where we were expecting certain level of consumption, we will see that will actually increase, regardless of how they spend their money. It would be nice if the politicians could spend the money here rather than importing tractors and cars. We've been doing that for the last 20 years. So it would be nice if they actually just gave people.
Like, can you believe he's the guy who's not drinking? But I think this is as much as you guys can tolerate of us. We are going to go and pack this away, keep it safe. We're not going to drink it. But we hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'll be back on your screens at the end of next week. We'll welcome your comments and feedback on our social media handles, which will be coming up with the credits. We also welcome your ideas about topics you'd like to hear us talking about in future. Enjoy your Friday evening drinks. Don't do anything we wouldn't do. If you do, please do it better. And enjoy the rest of your weekend.